So we're going to look this morning at the festive feast of Halloween, otherwise known as All Hallows Eve, a time of fun and excitement, of bobbing for apples, of putting jack-o'-lanterns out, for the most important part, dressing up in costumes like people who were dead and witches and warlocks and your favorite Star Wars character and your favorite Batman character, right? All good, innocent fun. And most importantly, we do this because we get candy, right? And we know it's mentioned in the scripture, so it's okay. Are you with me? Can we be like the Methodist churches and sell pumpkins on our yard to raise money? And that's the problem with this feast. Many people think it's just sweet and innocent, and how is kids going out for candy going to hurt anybody? So you might wonder who created Halloween. And the answer is very simple: the dentist. Right? Because what happens once all these kids eat all the candy with the sugar in it? They get cavities and they have to go to the dentist, so it's a way for them to continue to make money. But now let's take a real look at this feast, because this is a very bad time in our history. The origins of Halloween actually are a precursor to Christianity, but that doesn't mean it's a precursor to Judaism, right? Matter of fact, in the scripture, and we'll look later on, actually talks about and forbids us to deal with witches and witchcraft. And so that's where this comes from. This is a pagan ritual that was created by the Druids and the Celts. It was brought out of Britain and Ireland, and they observed the feast on October the 31st. And of course, unlike modern-day Halloween, this was no children's holiday. And that's really an interesting point of this feast, is we see people say, oh, well, you know, it's for the kids. And you see churches trying to do counter things to it. They'll have trunk or treat. But why don't we celebrate Ramadan, right? Why not? We're celebrating other pagan holidays. We can celebrate Ramadan, right? We can have where we feed people at night. It would be a great thing for the community, right? Feed the homeless. You can do great things. But we don't do that. Why? Because our culture hasn't adopted it. And that's the issue that we're dealing here. This was something that was brought in to our culture, and people accept it now as almost as godly religion, as a godly feast. And in fact, it's a godless feast, and it's a feast of the false gods. And that's one of the main reasons why I really believe we as believers should definitely not celebrate it. It's a time to realize that we need to come into understanding of what is actually taking place. So, again, when did it start? It started about 2,000 years ago with the Druids, and they used it to mark they celebrated, it's called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, it's Samhain, so I would say that is Sama, a feast that is marks the eve of the Celtic New Year, which began on November 1st. The Druids served as advisors to the Celtic rulers and led them into ritual communion with their own gods and goddesses, and preserved their mythology and learning, much of which was quite sophisticated. Many of the contemporary Wiccans, and Wiccans is a form of witchcraft. When did that start? Do you know when Wicca started? Again, it started in Britain in about 1950. When did the celebration of Halloween like we have it today start? In the 1950s. So you can see here where the connection comes into place and how this has taken place. And look, less than just over now, 50 years later, it is completely changed. Do you know what the number one feast for retailers is in the United States? What do they make the most money on? What holiday? Is it Hanukkah? Nope. You don't have any after Hanukkah sales, right? Christmas is the number one retail holiday in the world. What is the number two? Hanukkah, right? It has to be, right? No. St. Valentine's? No. Easter, right? Nope. Halloween is the number two holiday for retailers in the United States and in many other countries as well. So we have this feast that has become very commercialized. We have places, that build up, haunted mansions, and it's all about scaring you, right? Does that sound like a godly holiday? Absolutely not. So we have to understand that this is where it comes from. The Wiccan community fully embraces many of those foundational pagan teachings as well as a host of other pagan teachings from the ancient world. The fall harvest was complete and the winter loomed ahead. The Celts believed the power of the sun was fading. For the next several months, darkness would prevail. The Celts believed that during that month, the veil separating the living from the dead was at its thinnest. They believed that on the eve of October 31st, evil spirits and souls of the dead passed through the barrier and entered the world of the living. Departed family members would revisit their earthly homes. Sounds like fun, right? The thought, the thought was frightening and exciting. The Celts believed these spirits and dead souls could torment the living. Crops might be destroyed, babies stolen, farm animals killed. But this was also an opportunity to commune with the spirits and divine of the future. The devil, the Lord of Darkness, was ordinarily feared, but during this feast, his powers would be called on to foretell the future. So you kind of have an idea of what this feast was all about. It's a time of them coming together, of invoking the spirits. It says the festival was a series of ceremonies clearly aimed at invoking and tapping into the supernatural inspiration and power through their casting of spells, their inducing dream states, and sacrificing offerings, which not only included animals, but human sacrifices as well. So these practices were obviously not only brutal, but also against God's word. It is believed that like many pagan cultures around the world, the Celtics left food out for the spirits, hoping that the treat would prevent an evil trick, since the words trick or treat. Again, we see this going on. Centuries later, the festival was changed by people dressing up as evil spirits. They roamed from house to house demanding food in exchange for the spirits, leaving the home unharmed. They carved demon faces and hollowed out turnips. We also do pumpkins and lit them with candles. That night, they also practiced many customs designed to figure out the future. And so we see how it comes in. So, how do we see it going forward? When Christianity began to spread throughout Europe in the 3rd and 4th century, the pagan temples were torn down. But pagan worship never completely disappeared. The festival remained as a primary pagan festival. Belief in the spirits may have waned, but many of the old Samaritan, old teaching traditions continue to be practiced, especially by the children. Primarily in Ireland, children dressed as spirits and went from house to house demanding a treat. And then when they received none, they performed an unwelcome trick. They were play acting as part of the evil spirits as part of this. So you see how this comes about. When it was made even worse in the 8th century, when a decision was made by Pope Gregory IV that attempted to sanctify the season, he established the celebration of All Hallows Evening on October 31st, followed by All Saints' Day on November 1st. So you see this come in place. When was this done? How many years later? 8th century. So we see here that this was what we now see is some of the church trying to do is make a change with it, or bring it in earlier. You see many churches now the week of, the day before. They don't usually do it on Halloween, but sometimes they do. The trunk or treats, where they're saying, okay, well, at least you're bringing your kids to safety. Well, but what are we doing? We're giving in to satanic worship. And so essentially what we're saying is it's okay to do that. And we know for a fact it's not. So we need to be very careful on how that's done. One of the reasons why it became so popular here in the United States was the immigration that took place in the 1800s from Ireland. And just like any time you get cultures coming in from other places, they bring their traditions and their facts. That's why, if you notice on the news, many of these countries are concerned with what's going on in Syria with all the people fleeing the land, because what is their faith? Islam. So the United States, for example, I think it's now that we're going to bring out in 200,000 Syrians are going to be allowed to come into our land. Well, guess what? They're not going to be coming to Messianic churches. They're not going to be going to Baptist churches. They're not going to be going to Messianic congregations, Presbyterian, Catholic. Where are they going to be going? To mosque. So we're going to see an increase in Islam in our land. And that's what many of the countries are very much fearful of, because when you bring in the people, you bring in their culture and their tradition, just like what we saw with the Irish immigrants in the mid-1800s being brought to America. They brought the custom of Halloween into the States with the familiar costumes, trick-or-treat, carved jack-o'-lanterns, and etc. So we can actually blame this one on the Irish, I guess. If we have to blame someone, we blame the Irish. If you're Irish, I'm sorry, but... Oh, they'll try. The Irish Jews. So we see here what's going on with it. And, the interesting thing is, even though nowadays we see the custom of kids going out trick-or-treating, and it's become an American tradition, in only recent years have parents hastily, to send their children into the streets have become increasingly dangerous of accidents, poisoned food, and, things going on with strangers. I always said, if a terrorist organization wanted to put fear into our country, this would be the holiday they could do it on. Because you can go to malls and they'll, people in masks will give out candies and things like that, and people take it. And how do you know it's not laced with something? You want to destroy put fear into the world. That's a way to do it. And they hate other religions too, so they'd be getting rid of another religion. It's a double whammy for them, because they could actually, hopefully no one's listening that would want to do that. But that's what the scary thing is, right? That something like this could happen, and that we see it. And with the fact that the baby boomers have come up. Many adults now are partying. Do you know that what is the biggest night of the year for partying for adults? New Year's Eve, followed by number 2 would be Halloween. So not only is it the second busiest for retailers, it's also the second most party time for adults. So we can see here that this is a very troubling fact with what goes on with it. It is not a godly feast, and we need to be very careful with what we do. But more and more people are letting their kids dress up and go out and really act foolish, do evil things to people. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Is it just a simple, it's just a tradition? It's not going to hurt the kids. They don't know what's behind it. But just because they don't know what's behind it, does that mean it's right? And the answer is no. Natalie has never celebrated Halloween. I think she's grown up just fine, right? But we also, it's almost like we're captive. You're either captive in your house or you have to flee your house for that day. And that's not how it should be. We should not have to fear what's going on. And, it's scary. In our neighborhood, they bus people in. I kid you not. They bring people from other neighborhoods into our neighborhoods. And it's amazing what goes on. And, to see people doing this, it's really a shame. And we as Christians do need to stand up, I believe, and as believers, and say, no, we will not do this. I think there needs to be a real campaign against it. Guess what? If enough people do it, guess what happens? The economy will actually feel a dip, right? Because we're stopping what's going on. But retailers, guess what happens? If retailers don't make money at something, guess what they stop doing? They stop selling it, right? You go into Walmart right now and look at the racks and racks of candy that they have packed out, right? And all the costumes. Again, it's supply and demand. If there's no demand, there'll be no supply. It's a real simple concept. It's something that we can change. So while children and adults innocently imitate the ancient Celtic customs, darker practices persist. Witches and Satanists still consider Halloween to be one of the strongest times during the year to cast spells. I once heard a Wiccan on the radio say, we love Halloween because it's the only time of the year that Christians and Wiccans are celebrating the same God. And it ain't the God that we celebrate, is it? So we really have to have this understanding of what's going on. The rituals include, drowning down the moon. They also, sacrifices. Do you know that starting the 1st of October, places like the Humane Society stopped giving away black cats because so many of them are killed in their rituals. So they actually stopped doing it knowing what they'll be used for. So we have to be, again, very careful with this and how things are done. We need to see also that, that these ideas of, it doesn't hurt anything is important. The place Stonehenge during this time in England is also a site of very bizarre gatherings of the occults and some who believe in the modern day Druids. So there's still people who believe in it today. So let's look at I want to look at a couple of the things, and then we're going to look at from a scriptural point of view. But let's look at the different elements. So the jack-o'-lantern, why is it important? Why do people put jack-o'-lanterns out? The Irish also did something that has become really a symbol of Halloween in America. They made jack-o'-lanterns. The original jack-o'-lantern were potatoes or turnips carved and illuminated by Irish children and used to light Halloween gatherings. They commemorated Jack, a shifty Irish villain, so wicked that neither heaven nor the devil wanted him. So he was so bad that even the devil didn't want him. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Right? It goes on to say, the devil, rejected by both the scary and profane, he wandered the world endlessly looking for a place to rest. His only warmth, a glittering candle and a rotten potato. Hence, the jack-o'-lantern finds its historical place in history and religion of the Celtic people. Further, the same can be said for the use of orange and black as a tradition of Halloween colors. Even the traditional colors of Halloween reflect Celtic origin. Orange is the color of the autumn harvest. Black is the symbol for death. Of course, not only do we have jack-o'-lanterns, we also have what? Witches and warlocks, right? So let's look at the broomstick and witches. This image shows an ancient ritual in which witches mounted broomsticks, and you can imagine what that was supposed to be a symbol of. I'm not going to say since we have kids here. And leap high around the fields on them to teach the crop how high to grow. In their drug-consistent society, it should be noted that the flying witch actually related to the fact that witches believed they could fly great distance to their feast by smearing their bodies with a flying ointment. The ointment actually contained drugs like belladonna and others that gave them a psychotic trip. Obviously, I was not a child of the 60s. So that they thought they had flown distance. They imagined they wished to. They are also images with which they convey to to our children. Right? Is this really what we want to do? The black cat. The black cat is also both the witch's familiar or magic helper, and is the chief totem of the goddess of Wicca. In legend, she turned into a black cat to commit incest with her brother, Lucifer. It is also a form of the Egyptian goddess Bast, B-A-S-T. So ghosts and skeletons. These relate to the belief that the spirits of the dead were roaming throughout the land. They induce fear in children. So think about the feast. It all deals with what? Fear, right? Scaring people. What is, we have a holiday like this, don't we? In the sense that we give out candy and it's fun. What is it? And Purim. And what do we dress up as? Yes. We dress up like queens and kings, and one or two people will dress up as Haman, boo, right? But it's a joyous time, and that's a great way to celebrate. And you can see how Satan has tried to mock it by doing this feast. Skulls and masks. The Druze wore masks, skulls, and costumes, even offered human sacrifices on October 31st to ward off evil spirits. They wore the mask to make the other, quote, ghosts think that they were also spirits and that they wouldn't bother them. But have anyone ever done bobbing for apples? So here's where that comes from. In 43 AD, the Roman Empire was in solid control of the Celtic people. As a result of this control, the idol worshiping Romans introduced another ceremony honoring their false gods to the already demonical Druid New Year celebration. It was in honor of their goddess of the fruit trees. They would try to grasp fruit from floating in water without the use of their hands. This was the origins of bobbing for apples, and so you see how that comes from, where that comes from. I need to do something real quick. Sorry. Again, we're going to now look at trick or treat, and we talked about this a little bit. The Druids went from house to house asking for contributions to their demonic worship celebration. If a person didn't give, their trick was to kill them. The people feared the phrase trick or treat. Therefore, it is inappropriate for Christians to celebrate Satan's high holy day or to celebrate with those who practice witchcraft and the occult and occult symbols such as witches, black cats, ghosts, jack-o'-lanterns, etc. This is a time to be used to make children aware that Halloween is not of God and that we should not do it. So what does some of the Bible say? You know, you hear people say, oh, that's not going to hurt them, right? It's just fun. Well, Paul said it wouldn't harm a Christian to eat meat sacrificed to an idol. After all, the pagan god that the meat had been sacrificed to weren't real gods. And you hear that from people who say, oh, it's okay, right? But what they forget to say is what the rest of that scripture says. Paul went on to say that by doing what the believer was free to do in the Lord, the believer may be distressing another believer who doesn't realize he has this freedom. Be careful, however, that you don't exercise your freedom that does not become a stumbling block for others. Also, we know that God tells us not to do this, correct? In the scripture, it tells us in numerous places, it says, the nation will that you're about to dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery. Do not listen to those who practice sorcery or deviation, but as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so, right? So we're told not to do it. Avoid every kind of evil, 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good, Romans chapter 12, verse 9. So you see in many different places where this all comes about and how this all is set in place. So for us coming up this time, we actually wanted to do it now so that you have time to really think about this. We also have the this on the website, so you can actually print this out and you can see where it was. I'll never forget when Judy first wrote this. By the way, Judy has the credit for this, not me. She did a great job with it. And she had printed it out. We were going, and the person at that time who was doing our hair, we were telling him about it, and he was a good Christian. He loved the Lord, you know, and he pulled the same, oh, it's just, you know, it's for the kids and all that. And Judy had left him a sample because he had a teenage daughter. And it was like that night, it was, you know, it was Halloween. And he had just put it on his table. He didn't read it. Well, his daughter picked it up and read it. And after she read it, she went to her dad and said, I'm not going out tonight. It was that, it changed her mind that much. So we can see here that it's important for the kids to know. And you know what? If your kid has to have candy on that day, give them some candy yourself, right? You don't need to go out door to door. You don't need to have a fun time. We used to go bowling. That was when my back was better, right? You can do, you know, go to the movies. And it's a shame that we had to leave our house. Some people also, you know, instead of giving out, you know, candy, they'll give out tracts. You know, it's always a good thing to give out the Word of God, but let's face it, do you think the kids are really going to read it? I have one teenager now shaking her head going, right? They're going to throw that away. So that really doesn't work. So I think it's best that we not do anything than to try to, you know, or to educate. You know, you can put out, some people put out flyers. They put out the teachings on Halloween for people to take. But we have to make a stance, and the church and the body of believers must be the first to stand up. We need to be willing to say, no, this is not how it's to be, and how we need to look to change it. So I think it's really important that we understand how this comes about. I'm going to leave some time for questions. So we can get a mic down here. If anyone has questions, if they have any online, you need to let me know. You can text them to me through instant message. I'll turn it on right now. Do we have any questions? Joe has the first question.
It's on. Are you sure?
Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure, because you have the mic.
Is it okay to display uncarved or unmarked pumpkins?
Good question. And there's a dilemma to that. Because what's also going on usually this time is around Sukkot, right? It falls around the same time. It's a time of harvest. You see people decorate their houses out. We put many times in a sukkah, they'll put a pumpkin or something out there because it's the harvest that's being celebrated. So as I would say, if it's being done in a way that does not, you wouldn't think about it as being Halloween, then it should be okay, because people do decorate for the seasons, their houses, the front of their houses, and this is the fall time, so I don't see that necessarily being a problem. It's when you make the jackal, it's because it's carving the faces and doing that, that's what makes it evil. So that would be I would not have a problem going to someone's house that has pumpkin or multiple type squashes in front of it because it's a harvest, and usually they have leaves. It's a decoration symbolizing the fall time, which is not a problem. Good question. That was a good question. Next question. Yes.
Eggs. Where did that?
Eggs?
Yeah, like they throw eggs on. Where did is that the tradition? They just
you
started,
never did,
or
right?
Was that?
You never did that, but others.
I must say I did it.
So that is the trick, and it came again with the Irish. When the Irish came in the mid 1800s, that was one thing that they brought. In other words, if you didn't give a treat, you got tricked. And many times people would egg houses and do things like that, evil things to it. So basically, it's almost like what Mardi Gras has become, right? The church has this idea that for one day you can go and do wild stuff and it's okay. But that's not how our God works, is it? Nope. So that's where that comes from. Next question.
You see some churches having the pumpkins out, selling the pumpkins, and they have like
the Methodists
scarecrows and stuff out there, and it's.
I think that's unlike what Joe was talking about decorating your house, putting in front, and usually it's not just pumpkins; it's usually different squashes, things that grow this time of year. The main reason why they're selling pumpkins is for what? For Halloween, right? They wouldn't be selling it if Halloween wasn't such a big deal. And so I think that is wrong, and they're also doing it for money. And I think that's wrong. And I definitely look down upon churches that do that. And none of the churches that rent from us would be allowed to do that here. That's definitely, that is wrong. And the scarecrows, again, a scarecrow is usually not. That's usually a symbol used in farms. But if it looks like a skeleton, that's really the thing that it's about. Most of them usually sell pumpkins, and again, it's to go and carve it. And people say, "Well, how about if we carve something friendly in it?" Again, it's falling into how would a person who's not a believer know that you're a believer? Oh, because it's a friendly face in it. Well, that doesn't cover it, does it? So I am very much against it. Here's a question. What other pagan holidays have made it into the body of Messiah? Good question. What do y'all think? Well, Christmas and Easter are not. They have some. Christmas has some origins based off of pagan traditions, and so does Easter. But both of them were created to celebrate a miracle of God. But some of the traditions that have been added to it. If you think Halloween has it, go look up all the things like Yuletide carols, mistletoe. What's some of the other things? I wasn't raised. The wreath, the trees, all those things have pagan rituals behind it and cultures. It's amazing to see all the issues. Probably with the exception of the candy cane, everything else is pretty much pointing towards a pagan ritual. Valentine's, what's Valentine's Day is I think that was started again by the Catholic. Was it the Catholic Church? I don't know who started Valentine's Day, but that was and Saint Nick, right? The idea of Santa Claus, will all have pagan influences. Now, in Judaism, we have some pagan influences too. So don't think it's bashing the church. If you look at Passover, we're only supposed to do 3 things: the matzah, the bitter herbs, and what's the other one? I went blank. And the harosis, right? All the other things were added by the rabbis, and not all of them are good. So we have different things like that as well. So we've got to be very careful. This is not bashing the church. It's bashing religion, trying to adapt the other false faiths into theirs. Good question. Next question. So how many of you have celebrated in the past? How many of you are going to celebrate it now? That's good. Kids, it's tough, isn't it? I want candy. We'll give you a bar. I'll give you a piece of candy, right? But make it into a fun time, but don't try to make it into a thing that looks like Halloween, because that is a very part that we have to stop. And like I said, Wicca today still celebrates it. To them, it's the real thing, right? This is when they, have spells and do things and sacrifice animals and who knows what else. And so we got to be very careful. If you think about it, it's always about blood and guts and zombies and all these things. And that's not of God. It's something that man has to stay away from. So anything else? We got a few minutes left. Yes, on the very back.
Spiritual wickedness in high places, is that heightened or strengthened during the time of Halloween?
Well, what do you mean? You see more of it probably, but it's all. Wicca and all them celebrate all the time. So, are you asking? Do you see more? Rephrase the question. I'm not following you.
I'm not really sure how to rephrase it. I'm just wondering if wickedness that we don't see has more power over people during this time.
I don't think it has more power. It's more obvious. It's where usually it's something that's hidden. It's now brought out to the forefront. It's open, so it's easier for them to make people accept it. Like I said, the origins of modern day Halloween only started in the 1950s. So you can see how, you change one generation, you change the world. You know who said that? Adolf Hitler. He said, give me one generation and I'll change the world. And that's what's scary, and we're seeing that take place. Growing up as a kid, let's face it, most of us who are in our 40s, 50s, 60s, right? We did it, we didn't think about it. And we think, oh, well, we did it, it was okay. But now that we understand the truth behind it, it's really not. And it's not okay just to dress them up as little, good things, because, again, you're imitating the bad. And that's important. Did Fix have a question?
I was just going to try to explain what she was asking, which was, are the evil spirits more personified during that period?
And I think the fact is just really that they're more open. They don't have to be. They're not hidden, so we see it more. But I was watching a video online, and it says, there are witches today. They're not green like they were in The Wizard of Oz. Do you know why The Wizard of Oz, why she looks green? So when Technicolor came out, because of the makeup that they had on her, the Technicolor made her look green. She really wasn't green, but it made her look. And so that's why you have people do that in the pointy hats and all that. These are images we have. You know, Wiccas, look, you could be sitting next to them at work, you wouldn't know. What's the sign of Wiccans? It's an upside down 5-pointed star that represents Satan, right? So when you see a person wearing a necklace that has it's a 5-pointed star, they're a Wiccan. That's what they're celebrating. So you're probably going, oh, I didn't know that person was. Well, yes, they are. So that's a satanic sign, and that's what we need to be careful for. So I really encourage y'all not to celebrate it. Kids, you don't need to do it, and it'll be a lot better off. Any other questions? And you'll have less cavities, which means less drilling of your teeth. We can end dentistry forever. We can put them out of business. I do laugh. In my neighborhood happens to be Natalie's orthodontist, and I was surprised to see her out on her porch giving away candy. So we were in her office, a week or so later, and I said, I got a question for you. I said, I noticed for Halloween you were giving out candy. I said, isn't that like against your, your business practice? She goes, oh, it was sugar-free. So, all right, well, stand up, stretch around. We'll be starting.